Welcome to WeCan, Parul Somani. I'm excited to have you with me. You're a speaker, author, and coach helping leaders make decisions that matter most. You're a cancer survivor. You're a thought leader in the field of resilient decision-making and intentional living. You're an MIT and Harvard Business School graduate and developed your evidence-based path of least regret, which is also the name of your new book. Framework which Fortune 500 companies and high achievers worldwide now use to navigate uncertainty and make intentional decisions in life and leadership. Your book, The Path of Least Regret, can be pre-ordered now, and we'd love to encourage everyone to do that. Parul, talk to us about this evidence-based framework of the path of least regret.
So the path of least regret is a roadmap for making decisions in life and leadership in the face of uncertainty and change. And it was deconstructed from my own personal experiences. So, you shared a bit about my professional background. So I led this corporate career and management consulting and leading teams at tech startups. And there's a lot about decision-making, problem-solving, strategizing that I learned on that professional journey. But it was everything that was happening on the personal side with the hats that I was wearing, whether it be as a mother, as a patient, as a caregiver, as a career person who has been on both sides of a layoff, and really realizing that when it comes to the mindset, the coping mechanisms, the strategies that it takes to navigate all of the inevitable crossroads and inevitable curveballs that we have in life, it's actually the same set of strategies, and they actually apply across all different experiences. The specific point in time that was truly the genesis of the path of least regret, both as a phrase in my mind, as a decision-making lens in my life, really dates back to 2014, when I had been diagnosed with an aggressive form of breast cancer just 1 week after my second daughter was born. And it was that journey where I maybe naively thought that breast cancer has been around for a long time. The doctors will tell me what I need to do. But I was surprised to find out that it's actually more of an art than a science. And I was being asked what treatment plan I want to pursue. I was being given options. I was being given trade-offs. And I found myself putting on that corporate hat and trying to look at all the data. Let me look at the studies. Let me look at the 5 people in Norway that maybe had something similar and what worked for them. And I was trying to use the numbers to give me an answer. And what I realized is that there's no amount of data that I could look at, no numbers that I could crunch that was going to give me certainty about the outcome of my cancer experience, whether it was the recurrence risk or whether it was the side effects that I might have. And so when I realized that there's no path of least resistance, there's no easy answer, I asked myself, what's my path of least regret? And I had even blogged my entire cancer journey real time back in 2014. And the blog post where I wrote about this decision, I actually titled The Path of Least Regret. And now 10 plus years later, I've been able to really define it into more of an evidence-based framework, test it with coaching clients and leaders for workshops that I've led at companies, and really codify it into a 5-phase framework that takes people through not just the emotional journey of change and decision-making, but more tactically what the actionable tools are to navigate each of those phases with more intention and resilience.
I love that this is a really personal experience that you had to put into practice to get through your cancer diagnosis, and then really blew it up into this really big vision, helping other people. Parul, so talk to us about some of those tips or that advice that you give and that you want readers to get when they get your book.
Sure. So there's a few different elements. One is there's a reason it's called the path of least regret and not the path of no regret. So it is acknowledging head on that we can't know what our future selves want. So when it comes to trying to live this life of no regrets, it's actually very difficult to do that, because studies prove that who we are today is who we tend to think we're just going to always be. But this illusion of continuity is actually flawed, because even if we look back in history, who we were 20 years ago is so different from who we are today, and who we might be in 20 years, and what we might value and what we might prioritize in that future time is also likely to change. In addition, we can't control outcomes, right? As much as we want to, and we want to try, there's so much that is uncertain and unexpected in what can happen. And so the focus is around really minimizing regret. And on the flip side of that, it's really maximizing peace of mind, knowing that no matter what happens in the future, no matter what the outcome is, no matter how our own values and priorities might change, we knew that with intention and with effort, we tried to clarify what matters to us today. We tried to collect all the information we could to inform the decision that we're making today, and then really having peace of mind in that approach, that process, and knowing that, no matter what happens in the future, if we were to rewind back in time to the point we made the decision, that we wouldn't have made a different one. Now, in order to actually get to that decision point, though, and to apply that decision-making lens, there's a whole journey that comes before and after that we also need to navigate. So when it comes to decision-making, especially in the face of uncertainty, it's often triggered by a change. Now, this change could be an unwanted change, like a diagnosis, or like a layoff, or like a loss. Or it could be an inertia-based change. It's just that we progressively feel like something's off or missing in our life, but we're just caught on that hamster wheel, whether it's in our career or in a relationship. And we start to feel that nagging sensation that it's no longer serving us, that we can't get ourselves to actually disrupt the life that we've accustomed to make that change. And so what the Path of Least Regret does in the book and as a framework is really start with the very beginning of that change, when that drop in mental well-being actually either happens suddenly or becomes something that no longer becomes tolerable for us. And it's not about just pushing those hard feelings aside and trying to move forward with clarity and intention right away, but it actually begins with pausing and really becoming aware of what those hard feelings are, and truly honoring them. Because it's actually by naming our emotions and identifying what it is that we're feeling and processing that we're actually able to wire our brain to not be so reactive, but actually start truly firing up our prefrontal cortex and thinking about problem solving, right? That simple act of naming our emotions shifts us from reactive to proactive. And so the book starts by guiding the reader through how to honor and become aware of what your starting point really is. But then you also don't want to get stuck there, right? And that's the challenge, is when you identify, process, and honor those hard emotions, what you don't want to do is then start ruminating, spiraling downwards in those emotions, and keep those from holding you back. And so then it becomes a journey of identifying what are those mental roadblocks that are holding you back? What are those mindsets or outdated beliefs, outdated expectations you're holding of yourself that need to be overcome? And what are the strategies to actually tactically start approaching that? And only when you start that hard work of truly understanding your starting point, doing the ongoing work of unraveling your mental roadblocks and exploring what else could be, that's when you're truly in a position to make a decision that is going to be aligned with your North Star, with your current values, and enable you to move forward in a way that helps you create the change that you're actually looking for to live a more aligned life, or make a decision for your company that's more aligned with the company values. But then it's also recognizing that at the end of the day, the end of that journey isn't linear, right? There's going to be some new curveball. There's going to be some new detour, as I call it, that's going to put you in another feeling of misalignment. And that's when the Path of Least Regret journey begins all over again.
Yeah. Amazing, Parul. As I'm listening to you, I love what you said, the illusion of continuity. And I feel we live in those times, right? We have sort of been programmed as humans to always have a plan, to know where we're going. And all of a sudden we live in these disruptive times with the technological revolution, a society changing at high speed, the center middle lost, a lot of extremism around the world, really uncertain times where a lot of unexpected things are. And we sort of are supposed or we are trying to find our balance, and it's really hard to do that in these times. So I think your book is coming in a perfect time, because all of a sudden we realize that our paths might not be linear anymore, and the paths of our children might not be linear anymore, right? We might have various careers. We have to be able to reinvent ourselves. We have to be much more resilient than we ever were. And how can we do that? And your book is talking to that. So I think that's really important. We sort of understood the pivotal points that took you to where you are today, Parul, but maybe you can talk to us about, you've already said about when you had put your blog post. I think your blog was called New Job, New Baby, New Cancer, and you wrote that for quite a while, and you must have had a lot of epiphanies, and just experience that brought you to more insight, which is what you're using now to support other people on their journey. But maybe talk to us a little bit about the work that you do all the time now in terms of speaking, in terms of coaching, and the sort of typical scenarios that you see play out again and again.
Happy to do that. Yes, I definitely grew up with that desire for certainty and that desire for control. And in a sense, almost thinking that I also had this clarity of what my life was going to look like. In high school, I was already convinced I'm going to be a corporate lawyer for a high-tech company, which was very precise and not sensible necessarily for a high schooler to think about. And so I think one of the biggest things that my journey, whether it be the cancer diagnosis or other curveballs in health and career, have taught me is how to exercise that muscle of agility and become increasingly comfortable with uncertainty and with things not being able to be controlled at the macro level. And when it comes to our comfort with uncertainty, when it comes to our resilience, realizing that those are actually muscles that we have to exercise over and over again. And so when it comes to the work that I'm doing now, I have channeled all of those corporate experiences that I've had as a management consultant, as a tech leader, to the work that is more as a speaker, as a workshop facilitator, as a mindset coach. And I'm largely working with high achievers, leaders who hold themselves to these, perfectionist standards, who want that control, who want that certainty. And yet, just like I did, inevitably hit that crossroads in their life, whether it be I've been in the same job for 20 years and it no longer feels aligned to what I care about now. I just don't know what's on the other side of that. Or it's my parents are becoming increasingly older and require more caregiving, but they live far away. How do I think about how I can show up for them and, also recognize the roots that my family had where we live today? I also work with founders and entrepreneurs who are making decisions for their companies and thinking about, do I buy or do I build? Do I sell? And is the company that they started from the ground up still the company that they want to be at the front helm of leading? So the insights of the path of least regret, how to think about crossroads, how to think about the decisions that matter most to us, whether that's as a parent, as a patient, as a caregiver, as a business leader, as a spouse, as a friend. It really applies, all the insights apply to all of those. And so when I'm, and that's what I see when I'm working with others, when I'm giving keynotes. I've given a keynote at the San Diego Convention Center at a conference of hospitalists. So everyone in the audience is there because they work at a hospital in some capacity. And yet what they also are parents, are patients themselves, are caregivers. And so there's never really a talk that I have or a discussion that I have about resilient decision making around navigating uncertainty and change that only applies to an individual based on the title that they have or the company that they work at or the role that they serve. You know, the way that they absorb the learnings and what aspect of what story resonates with them really depends on what aspect of their life the greatest crossroad happens to be at that season of their life. And what I love about The Path of Least Regret and what I hope for with this book as well is that it's a book that people can come back to time and time again, because the change that they're facing, the crossroad that they're experiencing is going to change over the years. And so what part of the framework resonates with them, what's part of the stories most move them is going to change as well.
Parul, as I'm listening to you, I'm thinking we get told all the time that we should know what our values are and then we align everything else in our life accordingly. I think it takes us many decades often to really figure that out. What would your advice be to young people that are between sort of leaving school and, first or second job now, that maybe in these times have to define their values faster? Right? They are literally asked to figure out what is important to you and what would your advice be to really align your life around these insights?
I love that question because, like I shared when I was in high school, I thought I had this clarity of what I wanted my life to be like. And there is a lot that as a younger person, we're still figuring out. We're still figuring out who we are, what we care about, how the world operates, who our friends are going to be, and how they're going to then influence our values and priorities. And, as a mother of 2 middle school students, I see that play out live, right? Is these young beings figuring themselves out. What I only learned about later in adulthood, but wish I had known when I was younger and starting off my career, is a framework called Ikigai. Have you heard of that before?
Yes, Ikigai, the Japanese, yeah.
So it's a Japanese concept where they don't have a word for retirement in the Japanese language. There's the term Ikigai, and it's your reason for being. And it's the intersection of 4 things: what you love to do, what the world needs, what you're good at, and the 4th one, which is what is traditionally called what you can be paid for when Ikigai is discussed in the Western culture. And I share Ikigai in my book, but I actually redefine it. And instead of calling it what you can be paid for in that 4th element, I call it what can sustain you. Because what can sustain you in different parts of your life varies. At some age, it will actually be what you can be paid for because you just need to build a savings and pay for rent. And as you're older, what can sustain you might actually be more about emotional sustenance, mental sustenance, avoiding burnout. And how I talk about Ikigai in the book also varies by where in the career someone is. Because tying it back to your question around how do we think about our values? How do we think about how our career might evolve from when we're younger to when we're older, and what can guide that? I really think that the 4 elements of Ikigai can serve as a North Star that each of us are actually defining throughout our lives and then working to intersect those 4 circles. So someone who's earlier in their career, their ambition or focus or expectation should not be that I'm going to take a job that is my Ikigai, my reason for being, my greater purpose, and at 24, I'm going to have that locked in. At earlier ages, at earlier phases in our career, it's important to think about each of those 4 circles independently. Because when we're younger, figuring out what we're good at is actually requiring us to get a job that's going to challenge us, to help us develop those professional skills and our capabilities and our training. What the world needs, there's obviously lots of things the world needs, but where is it that we get drawn to? and where is it we might be excited about volunteering our time? What are the causes that we care about? What is it in the news and the headlines that get us particularly, agitated or passionate about the change that could be?
Yeah.
And similar to like what it is that we love to do, right? Thinking of each of those four circles independently as a younger person earlier in your career, and making sure that you're investing in each of those four circles over time, then positions you well that as you get older, as you become more financially stable, as you become more established in your career and have more, you've in a sense earned the right to intersect those four circles and actually start crafting and pursuing what could be your purpose with a capital P, what could be your reason for being.
Amazing. Parul, so if you think about success now, you went to MIT, you went to Harvard Business School, you had this flourishing career, then you had this handbrake moment where you had to reevaluate everything. What does success mean to you now?
It has changed significantly, for sure. I think growing up as an immigrant child, the focus was always on success in its traditional way. It was the grades, it was the colleges, it was the prestigious internships, it was the companies that are going to be reputable and pay well. And along that journey comes a lot of learning and amazing friendships that I am so thankful for, and wouldn't try to have any of those have been changed, because they have led me to who I am today and have enabled me to do what I now do even better than I otherwise would have been able to. But in many ways, I think I've also returned back to my most authentic self if I think of what I was most passionate about as a child, right? My books on my bookshelf were all about like astrology and dream dictionaries and handwriting analysis, because I was always fascinated by us as people. What is it that we can control? What shapes who we are, and what's external versus internal? And that desire to actually help people is circling back to what I was always passionate about when I was younger. And when it comes to this definition of success and how that's evolved over time, for me, it really looks like alignment. Success is alignment. Success is peace. It's the ability to recognize with clarity what I value and what matters, but then actually aligning my actions and the life that I'm leading, aligning those actions to my intentions. And that applies at all aspects of my life, whether it's in friendships and connection and the relationships that I want to nurture and prioritize above all else, and truly recognizing that those have to come first, and then the life I build has to work around it. That the friendships and the relationships have to be the rocks, not the sand, that are filling our life.
Yeah.
And when I went through my cancer treatment, I had this realization that we're often aware that chemotherapy ages the body, but I found that it also matures the mind. And this realization that time is limited, that the impact that you have on the world can only be done in a certain period of time, really helped me recognize that what is that legacy that I want to leave behind? What is it that I want my girls to remember me as? What is it that I truly want to be spending my time and energy doing? And family and friends is a very significant part of that. But the work that I do now, transitioning my corporate career and even identity in many ways, because it was tied to the titles, to the companies, to the roles, and transforming that into speaker, author, which is like, when someone's like, what do you do? Like saying, oh, I'm a public speaker is actually a very odd and uncomfortable thing to have to say. And so I'm like, oh my gosh, for years I was like redefining my one-line bio like on a daily basis, because I felt like what those words were the definition of who I am. And it took me a long time to break free from that identity, break free from that definition of success, and now embrace that success for me is leaving the world a better place than it was when I first got here.
Beautiful. Parul, what do you feel are the biggest lessons or the sort of main messages that you're giving to your children? What are you showing them?
I am showing them that it is okay to share our vulnerabilities, to learn from them, and to help bounce forward from them. When I was younger, my mother had been diagnosed with breast cancer in her early 30s. And it was this family secret. Like, I understand why that's the case now, and she had her reasons, and I actually better understand them now as an adult than I did back then as a kid. But the idea that like a family is going through hardship or that you are going through a sickness, that was something that was kept tightly, quietly.
Yeah.
And we could talk about it as a family, but we never shared it with others. And it was always her story to tell, so I always respected that. But as her child, I also felt the burden of holding that secret. And, you know, as I got older and friends would share, like in college, like, oh, my mother is going through treatment, I would listen and show up as a friend, but I never shared with them that my mother also went through that, or that I can empathize in a way, you know, more strongly than you might realize. Because again, it didn't feel like my secret to share. And I don't want my daughters to carry the same type of burden, whether it is the treatment that I went through, whether it's a hardship that they go through. I want them to know that actually the more vulnerability that you share with the world, the more it actually embraces you in return. And if you take that time to pause, if you take that time to share with others, then you're not only finding healing within yourself, but you're actually also opening the door to others to share their vulnerability as well. And that's where connection happens. And that's where learnings happen too, about life is unpredictable, life is uncertain. This curveball that I faced, there's going to be a different curveball that someone else has faced, and a new one that I'm going to face, you know, in another few years. And taking that time to actually reflect on that journey, recognize you got through it, recognize you can do hard things and come out stronger on the other side, simply means that you're actually that much more prepared for the next thing that's going to come.
Parul, I love that you show us that we can do hard things, and actually how to do the hard things and how to get through them, and how to train that muscle of resilience that is deeply linked with your personal story. So one of the things you do, as you said earlier, is you're a public speaker. That, I think, is the number one fear for people in general. It's equal to being eaten by a bear or attacked by a bear, I think. So talk to us about these sort of main lessons that you could pass on, or this advice to people who are at, you know, at a junction in their life where they want to public speak or have to, and, you know, what are the tools to make this a tiny bit less sort of
Intimidating.
Yes.
Yeah. I would say the number one advice I would give to someone who has a fear of public speaking or is trying to prepare for that next presentation is to focus on the message and not on the words. Now, what I mean by that is I did speech and debate in high school. And I remember one of the speech events that I tried out was extemporaneous speaking, where you're given a topic, you have, I want to say, a half hour, maybe less. I totally forget. Maybe 5 minutes. I totally no. I think it's maybe like around half
not
hour.
Half an hour.
No. You have some time to prepare, and then you have to give like a multi-minute speech, like on this topic that you've been given. And I remember in my early in my speaking career, I would take that prep time to like rapidly write out word for word, like every verbatim element of my speech and then sit there and try to memorize it. And then when I would go up to present, I would try to be reciting this memorized speech word for word. And it was very obvious that I was like working very hard, trying to memorize the specific word that I had written down. And it was only when I shifted away from writing the speeches down verbatim, to using that prep time to write bullet points. Like maybe I wrote by verbatim that sort of opening line or my concluding line, but in between were actually the bullet points of like, what are the 3 main points that I want to make? What are the 3 main subpoints within those that I want to make sure that I convey? And when you prepare by anchoring around the message that you're trying to convey, around the feeling you want the audience to walk away with, around what insights you want them to walk away with, then you're actually giving yourself permission and space to say the words as they come out in the moment that feels right. It allows you to actually be more authentic. It allows you to cover the points that you want to make, but with the flexibility of what feels right in that particular moment of time.
Great.
And so that's what I would tell is actually first maybe begin by defining how you want the audience to feel and what you want them to walk away from or with. And then from there back into, as a result, what are the key messages that I want to convey, and what's the best way to convey them so the audience walks away with that feeling.
Yeah, amazing. Parul, so I talk to us about the plans and goals for this year and next. We know the book is coming out. It's on pre-order now. We want everyone to pre-order The Path of Least Regret. Talk to us about all the things that you're up to in this year.
Yes, well, this is actually a very exciting time because writing a book can actually be a very solitary experience, as you can imagine. And I think there's a lot of people who love the writing, and therefore the writing of the book is the fun part. And then the selling and marketing and talking about the book is the scary part. And for me, as amazing of an experience as it was to reflect on all of these journeys, these learnings, these insights, and document them into this book, The Path of Least Regret, which is so exciting to actually have and hold now. I think what's even more exciting is for me to be on this side of it, where now I actually get to share that with others. I actually get to, see people holding it and reading it. And, I can't wait for the moment where I'm now then getting that feedback loop back of what resonated, how did they apply it to their life? And, that moment where I might see it in the wild, where someone at the airport is reading the book. But between now and then, so as you mentioned, the book's available for pre-order now. So it officially launches on March 31st. And so between now and then, the hardcover and the ebook are available on Amazon, barnesandnobles.com, like most major retailers. And starting on March 31st on launch date, the audiobook will also become available, which is narrated by me. And, it felt very important for me to have my own voice be the one sharing the stories, and having the reader feel like they're building this connection and relationship with me as the author as they listen to it. So leading into launch and beyond, what I'm most excited to do is really expand reach and visibility of the book, and tying it to the work that I do as a speaker means that there are a lot of organizations, whether it be companies, whether it be nonprofits, whether it be universities and alumni associations. They bring in speakers to have these thought leadership discussions. And so really any organization that is looking to build the capacity of their employees and their members to become more resilient decision makers, to become more intentional people and leaders and team members and colleagues, so that they can feel more comfortable with uncertainty and navigate the change that's happening in their personal, professional, corporate lives. being able to come and talk to those teams and those organizations and share the path of least regret with them, workshop it with them if that's what they're interested in. That's what I'm excited to do over these coming weeks and months and beyond. And really just have people adopt the path of least regret, not just as a 5-phase framework, but really as this like mindset of how we live our life and our definition of success, and using regret not as this like burden we're trying to avoid, but truly as a compass for how we live our life.
And I'm excited, Parul, to read it, and I'm excited to celebrate you in this book and promote it, because it is not just for business, right? It's really for life in general. It's for us to be more intentional in problem solving, to be able to overcome all the changes, to integrate that sort of framework into our lives, to just have to feel better, right? To feel better physically, mentally. And we know that those sort of stresses can really take its toll. And so I'm excited to promote it with you.
Thank you. Yeah, I definitely believe that when it comes to resilience and everything around that, if we can nurture that at the personal level, then that will show up at the leadership level, right? If we can build resilient and intentional change makers and decision makers in people's personal lives, it'll impact how they then lead and how resilient and intentional those teams will become. And the more resilient and intentional teams become, the more resilient and intentional companies and organizations will become, and societies will become. So this book is really about connecting with people at an individual level and starting from there to then drive impact at an organizational and societal level.
Yeah, to put that ripple out into the world. Parul,
exactly.
What takeaways would you like our listeners to have from your story if you had to sum it up?
There are 3 words that I would anchor my takeaways in. They are resilience, intention, and agency. When it comes to resilience, it's what I shared about it being a muscle, and recognizing that it's not something that you just are or aren't, but that it, through this daily practice of recognizing the hard emotions, honoring them, but then also moving through them and allowing yourself to break free from them and grow from them is what resilience is, and is something that we're all capable of. Intention is really about giving yourself that permission to pause and introspect and reflect and get clarity on what is it that you care about, what is it that you're solving for. Because when it comes to decision making and really maximizing for peace of mind, you can only do that if you have that intentionality around clarifying what it is that you're solving for and making a decision that best aligns to that. And then lastly, agency. In this very uncontrollable world, remembering that we do have self-agency. We can choose to control our mindsets, our thoughts, our perspectives, the decisions that we have direct autonomy over. And so sometimes when the world feels too overwhelming, zoom in on what it is that's in front of you that is something that you can do. Yeah. And there's a quote that I love that I don't know who to attribute it to, but it says, don't wait until you feel better to do something. Do something and you will feel better.
Action. Yeah. Action.
Yes.
Is always that.
So this call to action in a way that's aligned and inspired and empowered is what I hope your listeners walk away with.
Parul, I'm so grateful for you to be on WeCan, to lead by example so powerfully. I'm so excited to read your book. I want everyone to go and pre-order it now, The Path of Least Regret. Thank you for giving us this permission of pausing and of looking at that resilience, intention, and agency system that feeds each other. I'm excited that you give us solutions for living in uncertain times. And I'm so excited to see what else is on the horizon for you.
Thank you so much, Stephanie. I will say, if there are listeners who want to follow along with my work or learn more about it, they can do so by visiting my website, which is parulsomani.com, or following me on Instagram or LinkedIn at PD Somani, and joining my mailing list, where I not only email about the book launch updates, but also ongoing tips for living this intentional and resilient life.